There they are.
Hello, hello.
Can you guys hear me?
Yeah.
Yep.
Excellent. Well, look, I am very excited to have the three of you on the session today. Thanks so much for joining, for taking time out. Really appreciate it. This is our first ExitCon, and for those who were in the first session, I was telling them about this next session we have. We've got two more after this, and it's going to be a bit of a marathon. We've got lots to go through, and I'm super excited to have you guys on and really appreciate it. I'm going to let you introduce yourselves, but thank you for those who are on the first session. And this session today, next one up, preparing an MSP for sale. So what are some of the things that you need to do before you look to go to market, and not just getting my perspective, our perspective on it, but having these fine gentlemen contribute as well. So I want to allow each of them to do a quick introduction. We've got Jay McBain, Dave Sobel, and James Kiernan. And you guys, thank you again for joining. Maybe we just go kind of clockwise here on the screen, or my screen. James, do you want to kick us off with a quick introduction on you, and then Dave and Jay, you take us home?
You bet. Thanks, Hartland. Great to be with everyone. So my name is James Kiernan. I'm with Kiernan Consulting. So I'm an M&A broker in the MSP industry as well. I've been involved in the channel for over 30 years. So first half of my career, bought, sold, owner, ran 7 different MSP tech firms. And then since then, I've coached and consulted in the industry for the past 15 years. So love the channel, love what I do, and happy to be here.
Excellent. Dave?
Yeah, I'm Dave Sobel. I am the host of the Business of Tech podcast. It's the #1 podcast focused on the MSP space. You can get news and analysis every single day on stuff that you care about. I'm a former MSP owner, so I bought an MSP during my time, sold my own successfully. Then I was involved with several channel firms that I snicker and go people have generally heard of, including Level Platforms, GFI, Logic Now, and SolarWinds. I was on the M&A team for all of those sales, involved with the sale of those businesses, as well as our acquisition strategy when we were buying other companies. So now I spend all my time thinking about what MSPs need to know, and I ask, why do we care?
All right, and I love Dave's his office, his background, memorabilia, and sort of the radio personality works well. So fantastic. Thanks, Dave. Jay.
Well, thank you so much. And wow, what a panel. I've been around 30 years, never owned an MSP. I've been on the vendor side as a channel chief for big companies like IBM and Lenovo. Have worked for a company like Autotask, built my own channel software company and raised money and went through all of that. And then spent my time last 7 years as an analyst, kind of looking at the system underneath our industry, and been able to get on the biggest stages in front of the biggest audiences to kind of promote our industry and educate others, especially, some of the money people in Wall Street and some of the others that perhaps don't understand our industry from the ground up in terms of what the opportunity is and why we're having this conversation today.
Actually, the thing that strikes me about hearing everybody's comments is how much there is to talk about and how little time that we have to cover. So we've got these sessions here, and Jay, you just got me going on a few other things, and it's not even in today's agenda. So anyway, for another day. We've got a poll that we want to put up here, and just ask our listeners to comment on. And Lyle, if you could put that up, that would be great. So the question is, what would be your reason for selling? If either now, if you consider yourself to be a seller, and if you don't, what do you think your reason would be that you would consider selling? Let's give a quick sec on that. just looking at the numbers here. So we had another poll in the earlier one, which was asking how many people would consider themselves to be a buyer or a seller, and the split was pretty close actually. These sessions, for those of you who are just joining us, are geared more towards a seller. But I was saying earlier that even if you aren't considering yourself to be a seller now, at some point you got to do something with your business. It might be 10 years from now, maybe 15 years from now, but you'll be a seller probably someday, unless you pass it along to your kids maybe. But even then, you're probably going to sell it to them. So that it was split fairly evenly, and I think there's value in this session for both sides. The question here of would you be willing to, or what's your reason for selling? Looks like we've got focusing on another business, which was one of the ones that I covered earlier. Retirement as next, and then burnout, and then other reasons here. So those are the order. Most people focusing on another business. And yeah, I mean, if you've got another business that you're trying to balance, it just becomes kind of harder, and you get to the point where you're working all the time, evenings and weekends, and you just need to make a decision on sort of where your interest is, where your passion is, and what the opportunity, I guess. So look, thank you very much for answering those questions. Let me talk first of all with everybody here, the three of you, with the challenges with expectations on valuation. And this is one of the areas that we zero in on with sellers, is because there's no point in going down the road of selling your business if the valuation that we feel that you'll be able to realize is not aligned with your expectations. And so and what you want and what you need and what the business is worth are not the same thing, right? So just because you need $2 million to retire doesn't mean your business is worth $2 million, right? Or whatever number it is. And so I think this is a really important point, is just to ensure there's alignment of expectations, and that the valuation is, it's more than just EBITDA, right? There's a bit of a tendency to sort of oversimplify things. And so what if you've got a business that's got a lot of hardware being sold, or you're a hardware business primarily, or a VAR, and contrast that with a managed service provider who's primarily managed services. And they may all have similar EBITDA numbers in terms of like an absolute number. It's 500,000, it's $1 million, it's 1.5 million, whatever the EBITDA number is. But what's driving that? And then what's the predictability of that revenue, the one-time revenue, the MRR? Is there customer concentration? Does the owner have relationships? So my question to the three of you is what are you hearing? What are you recommending when you get into the weeds of deals being negotiated, deals being contemplated, deals you heard about getting done even? On how are buyers valuing these separate streams of revenue? So on the one hand you've got VARs, on the other hand you've got a managed services business, but there's a decent portion that's from projects and so forth. Do you see like a set formula? Is this more of an art, or is it more of a science? What are your thoughts or comments? And whoever wants to go first can jump in.
Yeah, I can kick it off. I would say it's mostly a science at this point. We've had 25 years now of an industry that's matured. It's 548 billion in revenue. There's 335,000 now companies that have at least one managed contract, and we have thousands of transactions that we get to review over the course of that 25 years. And I'll say that in a science, and I'll relate it to selling your house, selling your car, other expensive things in your private life, 80 to 90% of the value is already predetermined in pretty deep algorithms and understandings that others have of this industry. And if you have a nice kitchen, if you happen to have a really nice polished set of rims or something, there's a 10 or 20% up or down shift from that predetermined. But I'll say that, in most cases, and I spend a lot of time with private equity every day as an analyst, they're pretty well down the path of understanding. And you asked a specific question beyond EBITDA. They want to know the buyers that you serve. They want to know, and there's an algorithm to determine your revenue inside those buyers. They want to understand the industry. There's 297 sub-industries that fit within that model of where your revenue comes from and how sticky it is, and obviously how profitable it can be in that sub-industry. They look at your geography that you serve and have models based around that. The segment, from the lowest 1 to 9 customer through SMB to mid-market up to enterprise and government. And they will subsection your revenue by that, as well as products. There's hundreds of categories of hardware, software, and services now in the model that all have its own, EBITDA and revenue calculations. And the model itself, while there's 335,000 companies with at least one managed contract, there's about 43,000 now with 50% recurring revenue or above. All of the models, subscription, consumption, manage, project, break, fix, everything. There's 20 models that go into 20 different business models that go into these algorithms now as well. So suffice it to say, there's a heavy level of automation to determine the 80 to 90% of what your business is worth before anyone ever picks up the phone and talks to you.
That's wow! You got your numbers at your fingertips, Jay. I'm really impressed.
Don't ever invite an analyst to a panel.
I'm learning something here. Excellent. Well, look, I want to circle back on that, but let's see what James, Dave, your thoughts are.
Yeah, I would just I was going to just say I agree with everything Jay said, and that's it. I'm done. But no, I'll elaborate a little bit just to simplify things from the big picture. Buyers, the business will be worth more money on, like you were saying earlier, Hartland, on professional services. They like that recurring revenue, contractual recurring revenue. I like looking at 36 months, not just a trailing 12 months, but trends over a 36-month time frame. There certainly is a science to the valuations. There's a lot of similarities, but I think overall value, the more recurring revenue that you can get, the better. The 3-year trends, if it's pointing up, from a top line revenue, from a gross profit standpoint, net income standpoint, growth in professional service revenues, all those are positives that are going to help the valuation.
All right. So it's no fun when all the panelists agree. So no, I don't agree. And let me say two things that to sort of say, like, Jay's right, but I'm also going to say two things that show that there's more to it. So first off, there's not all deals are PE deals, right? Not all deals are coming in here where it's private equity that is a machine and does all this stuff. By the way, there's tons of different kinds of private equity, right? So the deal structures look all different. But when we take like two small businesses that are trying to come together, there's a really important element in the 10% that Jay talked about that is culture that will override all of the deals of coming together when we take two small businesses. So like Harlan, in a way, your question is like impossible to answer because it's trying to get all deals to look all the same. There's most definitely a science to this. And I will tell any business owner that asks me, like, look, we can figure out pretty damn quickly what the number is going to be. But let me tell you, there's an awful lot of variability and success of the deal in that last 10%. And so let's make sure that bit, because the outcome of the deal is what matters. There's a very different engagement strategy when, say, PE comes in and they're trying to buy a book of business and they want to integrate it into an existing business, and the owner exits stage left. That is a machinable kind of thing. But when you're trying to get two entrepreneurs to come together and take, two small things and create something bigger, well, that deal is going to look a lot different, because not only is they're the 90% we know, but there's the 10% we don't. But boy, that's important for that business to be successful 3 years later.
Yeah. Look, I mean, I'm scared to go up against Jay's numbers. But what that was the first sort of thought I had, Dave, with Jay, with your comments, is that I think, what we see private equity groups, and they have processes and systems, are very professional. They have models, and then you have the the group that's doing $1 million that wants to buy a $500,000 MSP, and they're doing their first deal. They don't have a model, they don't have a financial guy in the background, and so they're just kind of like, well, I'm going to apply a multiple to this thing and modeling it in some way. And so I think in those cases, it's not that there's no quantitative analysis that's done, but obviously they don't have the resources and it frankly probably doesn't even make sense to kind of run those kind of complex models. So I think it's like my sense is that on the high end we've got this very sophisticated model that's running, and on the low end we've got something significantly less than that. And of course,
just chaos. Come on, let's call it what it is, right? Like, let's call it. But let's get a little frisky and fun here, right? Like at the low end, it's much more about like what two entrepreneurs can do over a dinner table. Like that's the solid bit of the deal, and it's going to lean much more into the 10%. But the bigger the business does, it's going to more skew toward the systematic bit of that, and there's a delightful cornucopia of mess in between, right? Like that's kind of the point of it. Is everyone wants to come to a single answer, and the actual answer is, oh yeah, all of the answers. They're kind of all true, right? Just depending on circumstance.
Yeah.
Well, I'd say to the owner on the selling side, if your neighbor across the street comes over, knocks on your door, and says they want to buy your house, sure, that can be a very personal. It's Larry, your competitor across the street. Says, hey, 1 + 1 can equal 3. I don't know of anyone who's put their blood, sweat, and tears and their life into something that wouldn't go talk to some experts, financial, tax, and accounting experts and legal experts, an expert like James, who's in this every day. Before I maybe sell to my neighbor, I'd want to list it on MLS. I'd want to talk to some experts in my, who sells the most houses in my neighborhood. And, you're not going to go for the lowest dollar. You're going to say is there a private equity firm that wants to buy and, rent out my house? In the end, like it may be your baby, but at the end, you want to maximize your value. So while it's chaos theory, you do want to participate in the chaos to obviously get the top dollar.
Yep. 100%. Like it's, and I would say, like, have those experts involved in the deal. Like, even if it's just a reality check, right? Like just make sure that you're not, doing something that is leaving value on the table, or if you're the buyer, like overvaluing, like just make sure you're getting a reality check. I'm on board 100%. I'm just saying, like, it is not nearly as systemized the more you get into a personal style deal.
Yeah. And I think there's also the potentiality, as you said, some of those more subjective, qualitative type. Well, is the seller going to stay on? Does the seller have relationships? Can they open doors? The potentiality of some customers that might be looking to expand but haven't yet committed, so that revenue is not showing up. There's a lot to capture in a model, and I bow down to the guys behind building these models, because I can only imagine how complex they could be and how to model all that. Look, let's just, in the interest of time, although I'm sure we could continue on with this, let me ask another question. And so we talk to a lot of groups who have contracts in place with their customers, but then you start digging, right? We start digging a little bit further than that. All right, well, I have customers, checkbox. All right, great. What do your contracts look like? And I was just talking about that in my last session. So, we have contracts. They are, we ask, well, what's the term of those? Oh, they're month to month. Okay. So we don't have the security. The buyer doesn't have the security, right, for long-term stable revenue. They're not looking to buy a business and provide take on risk, right, where they are going to hope for the best and hope those customers stick around. On the other hand, we've got groups that say, well, I've got a yearly contracts. They auto renew annually. Great, excellent answer. Let's dig a little deeper. Well, do you have any out clauses on that, right? What are the terms of that? Well, they actually can give 30 days notice, right? So what's the difference between that and a month-to-month contract? We've got other situations where we've got customer concentration. So even if you've got a large customer and they're on a contract, stuff can happen, right? Just because they're on a contract doesn't mean that it's a guarantee. It just means that it's more likely. So there's still some risk there. So my question to the three of you is, what do you suggest to how to sort of, if you're advising a client or buyer, do groups walk away in these situations? What's an ideal structure? And then the other one is, and I have this conversation quite a bit. Someone says, well, this customer is worth, or let's not talk about customer concentration, but let's just talk about like you've got some diversification, you've got a portfolio of customers, but all of these customers are on, let's say, month-to-month contracts, right? But that doesn't mean that if you were to buy the business that it's a 0 or a 1. Like the risk is that all those customers are going to walk out the door on day one. You might lose some customers, no question. So if you've got $100 on the line, how much are you willing to put down on the basis that, well, I want to have some security that if some leave, I'm okay with that? Is it $50 on 100? Is it $20 on 100? Well, how do you advise, in these types of situations? So whoever wants to start.
I can jump in on that. You're exactly right, Hartland. Most every contract I've ever seen there's some type of out clause. All right, most everyone has that. And then if there is a long-term contract without an out clause, I mean, realistically, who wants to sign that? Those are hard to get. So what I would recommend is take a look at, number one, how long have you had that client? How sticky are you? Maybe a portfolio of clients, like our average length is 6.5 years. That's great. That's fantastic. If they're hemorrhaging clients every month and turning them over, that's a big red flag. And then again, like I commented earlier, I like looking at a 3-year history, and you can kind of see the numbers across the board, not just for that individual client, but total recurring revenue, for example, or total professional services revenue. And you kind of see the trends from there. Are they growing that? Is that shrinking, staying the same? So those are a couple ideas to help remedy the contract comment.
Yeah, you're looking at churn. James hit it exactly. You can look at how often customers churn. You can understand that. I mean, I always say, like, look, are you going to fight your customer if they want out? Like, contracts are like that. Right. Well, contracts are a thing, particularly the smaller the business, the less that is going to actually be enforceable. The customer says, I'm stopping with you. What are you going to do? It'll end up costing too much to recover anyway. So I don't overvalue that. I look at as James said, track record. The other thing that he didn't mention that you look at is concentration in one customer, making sure that they're not overly dependent on a single large customer for that. Like you see a lot of small MSPs, like sub 1 million. I tend to see a lot where they have like one really big client and then a lot of smaller clients. And it's like, well, okay, there's some actual risk here because a lot of revenue does depend on one. So I'm looking for diversification. Do they all look really good? What are as James said, the growth rates? The one I'd add there is that concentration in a single customer is important.
That's a good point, Dave. Yep. I would recommend the rule of thumb is you want not one client that represents more than 15% of the revenue. So you want it as diverse as possible. Go ahead, Jay.
Yeah, I'd add one layer to what Dave said. More importantly is the clauses with the remaining people in the business that's being acquired. So it's the owner principal, the E-myth that built this business. In many cases, it's the owner principal that has that relationship, the make or break relationship. If that owner principal is retiring as part of this and exiting the business, those numbers, that risk between 0 and 1 is much different than if you get a 2-year workout and the person's still young enough that just doesn't want to be running the business, but wants to run, a technical role or whatever else that really gets them up in the morning. So again, the nuances are there, but it comes back to science. Again, after thousands of transactions, we know to the decimal point what the average retention is on revenue. How reliable, how repeatable, how sticky, how scalable. All of these things are in models at this point. And there's good, bad, and the ugly. There's a time where you'll be 20% below that expectation, but I'll tell you, the expectation is pretty high. It's in the high 80s, by the way, in terms of how much revenue you're going to keep over year 1, year 2, and then be able to turn that back into expansion. But this also goes against the secondary stat that we have in M&A is that most fail over the long term. They don't fail as businesses, or they don't fail in terms of revenue, recurring revenue, but they fail in terms of what the thesis was and the reason for doing the transaction in the first place. That original thesis as it was written, when you go in 3 to 5 years later and look backwards on it, didn't realize. And not only happens with $1 million MSP, this happens with Microsoft and Cisco and others that are highly acquisitive as well, that they all do this work and go back to what the science was, and then going forward, adding layers of more complexity into the model to attune to that.
Right. You brought it up, Jay, so I'm gonna build on that. Like, I think not enough time is spent by the owner, the seller, in understanding the buyer's thesis. Like, there's a lot of these conversations, and it's always about like prepping the MS, like, how do you get your business ready and what do you do? And it's like, well, actually, one of the important details that you need to understand is that not all buyers are the same. They have very different theses for the way that they're going to approach. You can break it down to like their style, are they VC? Are they PE? Is it private money? Is it like, there's all different ways. And even within each category, there's various strategies. And you need to really think through the strategy of success for the buyer too, to make sure that you're going to understand what success looks on the other side. And you got to know their business in order for this to make any money.
Yeah.
So one thing that strikes me here in this conversation is what we see as a sort of kind of flip-flop. In the beginning, the seller is in a high school dance against the wall, waiting for some pretty girl to ask them out for a dance, right? And so they are trying to sell themselves and look good, and so then they get the engagement, right? They have these conversations, they get offers, but now our view is that they should flip that around and actually also, and we encourage them to have the ability to be interviewing the buyers, to say, well, what are your intentions? How do you see this business fitting into your business? And on the one hand, you want to get a deal done, but you don't want to get a deal done where there isn't going to be a fit, where it's not going to make sense, and potentially, the reality is that regardless of how it's structured, there's always a risk that the seller might not get paid for some reason. And so to the extent that there's not a good fit, or not as great a fit as there could be, you're sort of putting all of that on the line as a seller. So I think that sort of speaking to the points that you guys are making here, that understanding their objectives, and and I think Jay, I've certainly seen that where as you said, even at a large an acquisition with one of the he's referenced Microsoft, but where they say, well, we might want to go into a certain industry, right? We want to get into that space, and then they get into that space and find out, well, it's actually not what we want. This isn't fitting, and so then they spin it back out a few years later, and of course there's usually pennies on the dollar.
Hartland, I want to jump in and make a comment on something. Jay said something really important and fascinating to me, because he has the data at his fingertips. I'm a data junkie, so I can't wait to call Jay after this. However, so he's got the statistical information about the averages, the numbers, and so forth. Remember, if you do it right, you implement the best practices, you work with experienced people, the likelihood of it being much more successful is much greater if you implement those best practices. And I'm talking about culture. Culture, to me, is one of the biggest reasons that things fail. People don't do their due diligence on culture. The leadership, the moral compass of the leaders in both entities, that's really important. The people, the tools, the training. I can go on and on and on about how to move those levers, but that's really important as part. It's just not, don't analyze the numbers or the customers. There's a lot of other things to look at to make it successful.
Yeah.
There's a long story about MSP owners, kind of being genetically unemployable. The reason you're an entrepreneur is that, you don't work well in, military command situations. Then all of a sudden you have a board and you have a boss and everything else, and it all sounds good, and you're sitting on a little bit of a fatter bank account. But it goes back to those like early primal feelings you have about how your business ought to be running, that you actually are not the judge and jury on anymore. So, cultural one side, but, trying to move human psychology. There is no financial model. There is no spreadsheet. There is no numbers you can run on the human brain and how all of us work together. So M&A is so much more about psychology on whether things work or not than it is on any kind of quantitative analysis.
Yeah. So we could easily go down the rabbit hole here of more of the integration, and James is going to be speaking on that later. So I just quickly, and before I move on to the next point, but this idea, exactly as you said, sort of, and I've had many conversations with prospective sellers who said, look, I'm not employable. But when they want to have a role for some period of time, whether they want to or sort of are required to as part of a transition agreement, they need to understand that now they're not going to be, the buck doesn't stop with them, right? They're not making all the decisions, and they are going to have to report to somebody. And this is for a business that they used to own and make all the decisions on. And it's a real shift. And there may be some flexibility. You don't have to come in at 8, 9 in the morning every day. There may be a bit of that, but just in terms of like all the other decisions, they're not going to be able to make those. And I think that it's a very important point to understand. I don't think people appreciate that, although usually the time frame is relatively limited. But sometimes it can be condensed considerably when they find out that, geez, I thought I could do this for 2 years, but I can't. And if you've got a bonus, a payout tied to summer period, it's painful to get through that couple of years or whatever it ends up being. So look, let's just if we could just talk about contracts. So we talked about them briefly here, but what are the key components of that MSPs should ensure are part of their contracts? How do they deal with future price increases? Is a 5-year contract with a customer better than a 1-year contract, right? A 10-year contract. Now, I'm exaggerating. No one's customer is going to sign a 10-year contract, but where's the sweet spot, and what are the advantages and what are the disadvantages to having longer-term contracts? So whoever wants to sort of take that one.
I'll start by a bit of a smile and say, like, well, customers do sign 10-year contracts. They generally sign 10-year leases on physical space. Like, so there's a sliding value scale here, right? Like, is the the reason I bring up the lease example is that customers know, like, there's tangible things, and you have to make a physical commitment to it, and that's why oftentimes there are these 10-year leases that go along with physical space. One of the reasons that we are on the other end of this is that we have a lot less of the physical components that are immovable objects when we're dealing with both services and technology. Additionally, we portions of it move too fast, right? So I tend to fall into the model of I look at it and say, like, well, which models are playing out more? SaaS cloud is very much the driving factor in the way most customers are consuming most things, and that is a rolling 30-day engagement. Because it is, by the way, super intangible and super flexible and designed to scale up and down. I get the whole argument around the value and the ownership. But see my earlier statement around, if a customer says, you're gonna have, like, the value of the contract is difficult. Those large, a year, 2 year, 5 year, 3, whatever those deals, they tend to be between larger companies that, again, have more distinct tangible commitments that they can make to one another. The smaller the organizations, the more flexible this tends to be. But by the way, the joy of that is you also tend to expand the customer base and have more of them. So you have more small clients, so you can be insulated from the variability. And I look at this and I just sort of say I don't get really hung up on that, on the length of the contract. I get much more hung up on churn, retention, customer satisfaction, to understand, like, how good are they going to be. And I point most people and say, learn about SaaS. Go learn and treat your organization like a SaaS company, and you will learn the right metrics and you will manage the correct way.
Yeah, I'll say that, you can split SaaS into that conversation into 2 camps. If you're coming on to Dropbox or you're coming on to Zoom, you kind of log in, put your credit card number down, $19 later, you're off to the races. The bigger SaaS, the Salesforce, ServiceNow, Workday, Marketo, NetSuite, HubSpot conversation, it's when their costs are incurred. And so on a 30 to 30, they can't do it because the implementation, the integration, the cost of service is so great in the first 3 to 6 months they went off and asked for 1-year contracts. And in the last couple of years, that's now moved to 3 years as a sweet spot. And we're starting to see services move in the same direction. So when you earn a new client, in the onboarding stage, as you're doing all the asset discovery and, as you're doing all the relationship work at the beginning, your profitability at an EBITDA level, starts really, really poorly and every month improves. But even at a year, that will not have been a profitable engagement if the customer leaves you on renewal. So this idea of, month to month moving to yearly, now the sweet spot again from some of the money folks down is valuing that 3-year window as the most appropriate from a financial profitability perspective.
Yeah.
Right.
First things I look at are, term, price, and the out clause. So look at those key elements first, and then go back and revisit. I like looking at the auto features in there. We need to make it as technology companies, right? We need to make it easy to do business with. So I like, the auto renewals. I like automatic price increases, at renewal time or year over year. So you're not fighting with them every time you have to up the price. Auto pay, that's one of the primary benefits of recurring services is getting the cash up front. So auto pay, and then revisit the pricing. And especially if you're looking at it, as the pricing methodologies, the price per seat, for example, is that similar to what you guys do, versus the company maybe you're buying. So those are really important things that I look at.
Yeah, I think there's one more piece to that now is not just the out clause, but 10 years ago, moving indemnity around cybersecurity.
Yes.
Who can be sued and who could be, and now we have regulation, state by state that's starting to be introduced to support that. And now we're on the precipice now of AI. And as language models are being tuned and trained, as IP could leak out of the organization into consumer level language models, there's a heavy there. So, contracts, not only on out clauses, but in terms of, who and how, protection is done. And again, we don't know what's coming, after AI, but this idea of flexibility to make sure that that these contracts do have, legally the proper. And after 25 years, I'm going to say that there's been a lot of improvement. And if you're an MSP and you haven't done a contract audit, gone into a peer group, gone into like-minded, and went to the best of the best, a lot of it's published outside the firewall now, in terms of what really, really good contracts look like today, given everything I just said.
Yeah. Great, guys. All good things for everybody listening to consider, certainly. And talking to your attorney as well to make sure that you have contracts that address some of the points we talked about earlier. Assignability is one that we often see as being overlooked. And
by the way, you might want a secondary attorney. This is an interesting industry where you might have the attorney down the street in your local town that you've used and your parents used and your grandparents used and things like that, and good friend of the family, everything else. I'd want to go out and look for an MSP specific. That's a $548 billion industry. I'd want to know who kind of the super connectors are, not only in law, but in accounting and taxation. I'd want to go, and you're not going to be hiring these people, on a daily basis, paying retainer. But again, when you do your audit, I probably want to be talking to the smartest people on the planet in my industry and using the local people for general ledger and some other stuff.
Jay, that's a really good point. I don't want to, I got to move on to the next one here, but I will say that recently it actually happened twice with two separate sellers that we were working with recently, about 2 months ago, I guess. And we had to have this sort of awkward conversation. They said, yeah, we have an attorney. They started getting involved. One was an expert in real estate, and they didn't understand the MSP space. They were asking questions and proposing solutions that made no sense. And we had to have an awkward conversation with the seller saying, look, you got to find another attorney. Like, this deal is never going to get done with this attorney. And so somebody, as Jay's saying, who's familiar with the MSP space, and also, if you're selling the business, familiar with M&A. So it's not just an M&A, it's not just an MSP attorney who's familiar with contractual law, but both. Ideally, so yeah, we could talk more about that, but let's just park it there. Let's poke the bear a little bit here and talk about we've talked about recurring revenue. We've talked about the fact that buyers desire that. The age-old question of converting break-fix revenue to recurring revenue, and I guess it's possible. We all know it's possible. We also know that it's difficult. Can we just talk a little bit about some of the friction points and sort of how to address them? So a seller's got a fairly significant portion of their business is break fix. We find typically that buyers look at about 40%, less than 40% of recurring revenue. They're not really interested. More than 40%, they're interested, and obviously the more the better. But the holy grail is to get your numbers up in, it's very rare that you're going to have anybody who's got 100% recurring revenue business. But if it's going to be up in the 70, 80%, usually when we see those higher numbers, they usually include subscription revenue as well. So, Microsoft 365, Adobe licenses, whatever it is. But what are your thoughts? What are your recommendations on a seller who doesn't have a lot of recurring revenue right now, and wants to at least move that needle?
Well, so I want to start by a certain statement, because people always act like break fix is bad. Last I checked, money is money, and buys and sells things the same way. What we're talking about is mix. In fact, one of the reasons why you don't see 100% recurring revenue, that is not good when you are in the business of delivering IT services and advice and engagement, because that's telling me you are making no changes to anybody's environment in any way, selling no projects, doing no transactional kind of stuff. Not everything is always perfectly recurring revenue. Right. So this is an important statement. And when we look at the best in class organizations, and I know Jay's got the data in different ways, the best in class tend to have roughly 60% of their revenue in recurring revenue and a healthy portion of transactional revenue. Right. So we talk about break fix like we're just thinking about that. The only bucket is this bad work that nobody wants. By the way, sometimes it's how you sell to them, your initial engagements or projects, and you will upsell them later on recurring revenue. Sometimes you're doing project work. I don't think consulting is a bad thing. I'm in the business of selling knowledge. Sometimes I want to sell my knowledge and be paid for my time, right? That is a transactional piece. So what we're looking for is the healthy mix, right? And so one of the things, Harlan, I would say is I'm looking for the overall mix, right? I'm also trying to understand what percentage of the transactional revenue has no recurring component at all in my customer base. So what I don't want to have is I want to have a pile of really great customers that I'm engaged with, and then a pile of chaotic customers that never convert into anything else, right? That is difficult. Those are two different staffing models. So it's difficult to do, but I know with a healthy recurring model, I've got to also have some project work and some consulting work and some high-end specialization. And by the way, sometimes I'm going to sell them stuff, physical things, right? And that's good too, because I'm keeping other people out from selling in that environment. So it's the mix you're looking for, not just raw revenue, but also what customers are on what percentage and what percentage have some recurring revenue relationship with me.
Great points. I really like that, David. Thanks for making that clarification.
So let me use one number, 30%. 30% of SMBs will outsource some or all of their IT. If you're north of 30% as an MSP, it means you're probably actively saying no to some types of revenue. Consulting, design, architecture, integrations, it could be ISV revenue, it could be a bunch of things. You're actively doing that, and that might be okay because you're going after sticky, reliable, repeatable, more valuable revenue, and you're keeping things less chaotic. So there's nothing wrong with that. So that number of 40 is a really good one to say that, that company's being selective. If a company has 75% recurring revenue, I would say they're probably leaving money on the table, profitable. And it may not be as repeatable, but it may be more transactional, but more profitable than the MSP business. And they can layer it up on demand as necessary. So to go get another $1 million of revenue from your current clients at a very profitable level and be able to have that engine built is really important. So I'm going to leave it with one other piece of research, which is what we do for the bigger cloud companies. There's $6.40 available, for example, at AWS, $7.63 for every dollar of Microsoft. There's $6.19 available at Salesforce in services for every dollar of product. So when you look at that pie chart, it's about $1 per dollar. So if you sell $100,000 of AWS, there's $100,000 divided by 36 of managed services available to you. Now, there's also $1 of consulting that might be going over to Accenture, Deloitte if it's a big account, local SI if it's not. There's also $1.50 of ISV because there's 6 other layers being sold into that deal that you could go and develop yourself and be a product player in that tech stack. There's design, integration, there's all kinds of things. So if you're only participating in 1 out of $6, I'm going to come in as a buyer and say, why are you leaving money on the table? Why, as a leader, have you not looked at your current clients and asked about this multiplier? And again, better managed your business as a percentage to get the highest revenue, highest profit, best outcome for your business. So
I love that.
Interesting conversation.
It's super interesting, and I think at the same time, by what I'm hearing is by not providing some of these services, you're providing some exposure for a competitor to come in and take that business away from you, because they are going to be trying to sell into them with some project or some consulting, some kind of engagement, and then, oh, wait a second, this other firm does all this stuff. You guys are only doing this one thing for us, and we're looking for a one-stop shop, and we're gonna shift. So
I've got a Venn diagram here of 19 other companies, business models outside of MSP that are now offering managed services.
Wow.
So that system integrator is more likely to come in with a managed contract, the accountant, the digital agency.
Right.
There are others coming in that could happily go and compete at that layer.
Yeah.
So again, be careful in terms of how you fine tune the revenue and make sure you're, blocking and tackling, doing the necessary things to protect your client.
Yeah, a client's a client. I agree. And I've actually seen some buyers look at financials and put 0 value on product sales, gross profit off product sales. I've seen them put 0 value on break fix service revenue. To me, I agree with something Dave said earlier, a client's a client. As part of your due diligence, a little exercise tip, one when you're analyzing someone else's portfolio, and we should do it ourselves as well, but list all your top clients and then all your services across the top of the chart and check off the box of how many services each one of those clients are using, because there's a great upsell or cross sale opportunity with a lot of them. So I see it as an asset when they've, a client's a client. I look at big client lists, lots of clients, and also big marketing lists. That's attractive as well.
And by the way, and I got to make this point, and additionally, we have a legal obligation to use the words AI in every presentation now, so I will do it, and we've not done it yet. But literally, if you're not having a conversation with your customer about artificial intelligence right now at some level, you are completely missing the boat to be their actual advisor. And last I checked, most of us have not figured out any kind of recurring revenue model around technologies that we're still working to understand. And so if you take a purist approach of, well, I only do the recurring revenue work, then you are completely leaving on the table the actual advice and high value that you deliver in an area that you need to, in a way, figure out with your customers, right? Because you need to sit down and talk with them about need and direction, and you need to start thinking about the questions they have and how you can apply technologies as they become available. you're going to need to do all of that stuff. I love that work. It's high value. I talk about it all the time. But I have no expectation right now that anybody is doing a perfect recurring revenue model around it. And that's okay.
And that's, by the way, the Achilles heel of the MSP model.
Yes.
So if you go back to cloud, it took 10 years to figure out on infrastructure how to wrap any managed services around it. 10 years of the biggest thinking of people on this call kind of leading that charge. There's a $278 billion SaaS industry that has almost no recurring revenue, and it's a recurring business model. So from backup to security to everything else, very, very little. And that's 25 years of a SaaS industry that MSPs haven't figured out. And there's one reason why. 75% of SaaS is bought by lines of business. MSPs think of themselves as IT. The CMO in many medium-sized companies spends more money on IT than the CIO. So this is a model where AI, to go to what Dave just said, 75% of the conversations are going to be happening with the head of marketing, the head of sales, head of operations, head of HR, head of finance. The 12 vice presidents, if it happens to be that big of a client, is going to happen outside of IT. There's nobody in CIO or CISO that's building a language model anywhere in the next couple of years.
Yep.
It's going to be a feature in HubSpot. It's going to be a feature in the SaaS Salesforce that they're using, the ServiceNow they're using. It's coming in as a feature, and there's no recurring revenue, as I've checked, on features, especially in SaaS. So this is a limitation on a buyer on where the opportunity is going to be, and to leverage the multi-trillion, the $7 trillion that we're all thinking about in AI.
Right.
It's not going to come the way that we think it's going to come.
Guys, I can't believe how interesting this is, and how much there is to talk about. And I didn't see it going in these directions. So I thank you very much. This is amazing. Really, truly, I'm saying that sincerely. I hope everybody who listens to this is getting a lot of value. Look, we've only got a few minutes left. I just want to hit with a couple other questions. And I don't know, Jay, whether this one is one that's sort of quite in your wheelhouse, given the exposure that you have. But there's that the saying of, to every seller, you should clean up your books, right? Get your house in order, and you should not be running personal expenses through your business, right? Like we've all heard that 100 times, but it just doesn't materialize that way in 95% of the cases. Now, obviously, the bigger businesses, and you got partners involved, and so you can't put your son's football expenses through your business, which I've seen, because it's a one person operation, like a one owner operation rather. But most of the listeners are probably going to be in the kind of $1 to $5 million range in terms of the size of their business, the revenue, their business. And so how would you suggest that they address this? Because their counter, right, is, well, I don't want to pay the government. I want to reduce my tax liabilities. So what are your thoughts, just really quickly, because I got one more question after this.
Yeah, for me, it's it's inside the algorithm. If they're doing, any level of due diligence and downloading your QuickBooks online, and they start to see your son's football jerseys, as an expense item to your MSP, that's going to negatively weight. So again, selling your house with a really bad kitchen,
right?
80% of the value is already determined by your neighbors, but now you're taking what the value of your house could be down. And so it's just exposure, and it goes back to what we've talked about a few times. Is a lot of the best practices are out there. Your peers, your peer groups have them, and doing an audit at what the things you can focus on. You're not going to be able to check 1,000 boxes, but what are the next 10 things I could do to, again, like something like this, like get personal expenses out of the business and work with my accountant and just make sure there's a separation of church and state. Is that a top 5 or 10 item that could get my house ahead of the market value as opposed to be a drag on it?
Or just track accurate. I mean, you can make sure your accounting system tracks for things in a way that is part of owner's compensation, at a way that, like, you can just account for it. And my advice, and just to add, is just transparency. Make sure that things are transparent, reveal, it's trackable. people understand that you are maximizing for value for the owner. Value means a lot of things. Just make sure you're tracking the value.
Yeah.
Excellent. James, anything to add?
I was just going to say, I agree with that. That's a big turnoff for a buyer if the books are messy. But Hartland, like you said, one of the primary reasons, we're all small business owners or business owners is to expense as much legitimate expenses as you can through the business to lower our taxable income. I mean, it's what most people do. So I get it, but it is that's on the checklist. If you are thinking of selling your business, you need to start cleaning your house now, and couldn't agree with you more. You want to make it trackable because people are still going to do it, and be transparent with it.
I like Dave's idea. We've seen that before where a group has essentially, owner benefits. And so the car is in there and the cell phone is in there. And so it's like one line item, you might be able to do a drill down on it and ideally, and you can, see everything, but it's like you're not having to like extract it from all the different parts of the P&L and have all these kind of complicated add backs you have to justify.
And by the way, that's part of the thesis as well, right? Is you're looking at your cost of goods sold and you're looking at your EBITDA and everything else. And to the buyer, once you start pulling out your car and your kids' football jerseys, that's a different profitability based on your revenue. That when they can roll up to a headquarters location, that might close their thesis without any revenue growth.
Right. Yeah. Okay. Good. Look, last question. What and just if we could literally keep it to like no more than a minute each, guys, because we're 3 minutes to the hour. What are the top reasons that you've seen for MSP acquisitions falling apart? What have you, or heard about?
From my side, it's culture. They didn't really analyze the culture well. It's not a culture fit. That's the big one on my side.
Yes,
right.
That plus bad due diligence. Where there are surprises, right? The trick is to build trust through learning everything and have a complete picture. There can be bad things there. There can't be hidden things there. Mm-hmm. So for me, it's the culture, and then I'll add proper due diligence.
Yeah, and for me, it's psychology. You've put 100 hours a week into this thing. It's your baby. I don't want to tell James how much his Mustang is worth, but the market does a good enough job doing that. This is a thing where you got to kind of step back and be unemotional. And you don't want to hear that 80 to 90% of what you've done is kind of in some algorithm somewhere and it's spitting out, and other people are all spitting out numbers within 10% of each other. It is what it is. And then you've got to get into what it really means to you. Again, psychologically.
Blood, sweat, and tears.
Where you are in your life, where you want to be in your life, and how all this fits. It's so personal. And the transaction can't be personal. And that's the hardest thing for most people to go through.
Yeah.
Well said.
Guys, let's park it there. I thank you so much. This is absolutely amazing. This is our first ExitCon, and you guys have hit it out of the park. So really appreciate your time. James, you're coming up again in a bit, so thank you for that. And we'll park it here, and we'll reconnect, and you guys can get a copy of this for your listeners as well. So thank you.
You bet. Thank you very much.
Have a great day. Bye.